I'm Cherylanne Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 335 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. Dare to ask, turn your wants into wins. So I was thinking about this topic of asking, and it is not surprising that this topic would be top of mind for me these days. I have 3 children. If you've listened to this podcast for a while, you know this. And one of my children is not afraid to ask for anything. The 3 children have very different personalities when it comes to this. Maybe yours do too, or maybe if you had siblings, you recognize that there was a disparity in the way your siblings approached your parents back in the day. But in our household, of our 3 kids, one of them just was sort of born not being afraid to ask for what they want. And the reality is, because of that, they often get it. This particular child is often the one who gets what they want because they've figured out or were born naturally with this ability to be clear about it and articulate it and sort of unapologetically ask for it. And, I'd be lying if I said it didn't cause conflict sometimes, both in my heart and my husband's heart, or, between this child and their siblings, because it really is something that is so unique to this particular member of our family, right? I'm trying to anonymize which child this might be on purpose. So the reality is that knowing how to ask for what we want is a skill that does open a lot of doors. It does change the outcomes for people who know how to do it. And there are some things in life that we don't have because we haven't earned them, right? There's some things in life that we don't have, and I'm talking about as adults, where it's because we didn't make choices to steer our lives toward them. Like, I don't have a house at the beach, right? I didn't make choices in my life to say, I'm going to choose to live in a coastal location because that's really important to me, right? Sometimes we don't have things in our life because we didn't make time for them, right? We just didn't prioritize learning to play the violin or learning to be fluent in Italian. But there's some things that we don't have simply because we haven't asked, right? That is one of the reasons that sometimes we have blocked ourselves from having something. I love this Nora Roberts quote. I've heard this before. If you don't go after what you want, you'll never have it. If you don't ask, the answer is always no. If you don't step forward, you're always in the same place. And I think we get evidence of this same idea in so many kind of famous quotes. I mean, biblically, you may know the verse, ask and you shall receive, right? And you may also know the Wayne Gretzky quote, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And I think that one is similar. I always think about that one as, remember back in the mall, like in the 90s, they had that store called Successories. And I swear that particular Wayne Gretzky quote lived on a plaque at Successories. And then I think Michael Scott famously quoted Wayne Gretzky's quote. That's a meme that's gone around the internet. So you miss 100% of the shots you don't take is just another articulation of this same idea, right? If you don't ask, it's not going to happen. And I think when we think about the circumstances in life where we want to ask for things or where we want to ask even for something that we need, right? Maybe it's not just a want, maybe it's something we actually need. There are lots and lots of examples that come to mind for me. And I want to go through some of these just to ground you in this, in case there's any little part of your brain going, well, it's selfish to ask for what I want, or it goes against the practice of gratitude to ask for something that, is more than what I already have. But let's think about some of the things where this skill is actually really, really important. One of them would be within the work environment, something like a flexible work arrangement, a less than full-time schedule, or the ability to work from home, or, to change your typical working hours. I think Flexible working arrangements are not something that typically get handed out on a silver platter. When I did the several versions of flexible work arrangements during my corporate career, and each time I had to ask for the arrangement that I thought might work best for our family and have a conversation. You could call it a negotiation about how that was going to play out, right? So that's one example. Also in the workplace, raises, any kind of compensation changes to responsibilities, asking for a promotion, asking for more responsibility, asking to be able to be a part of a particular project, right? There's a lot of things where we may have to raise our hand and say, hey, I'd like to do that. In the commercial space, thinking about your everyday life, you may have to go and ask for a refund of something that, the product or the service didn't live up to your expectations. In the nonprofit space or your civic kind of engagements, you may need to go ask for donations. I remember being a part of a fundraiser for our church community. They were hosting a big live auction and silent auction a number of years ago, something that became an annual tradition there. And early on, being on the committee planning that, we had to go and ask for donations. And some people were like, I will do anything except that. I will literally do any task on the entire committee. Just don't make me go ask for donations, right? Which I think is so indicative of how hard we find this as a society. You may need to ask for an introduction to someone who could help you, right? Professionally or personally. You may need to say, hey, I know you know this person. Could you introduce me? And that's hard to do. Another example would be asking for permission. Hey, I need permission to be able to do this thing that's not standard. It goes against the rules. Sometimes we need to ask for advice. And that can be scary. Just saying, sharing our story to ask someone who's been there before for their perspective or their advice. At home, I was thinking about examples at home because I had interviewed Eve Rodsky recently about fair play, asking someone to handle a task at home that typically has fallen to us, a task that maybe has traditionally been in our wheelhouse. That's another example. Sometimes socially, asking someone to join us for a walk or for coffee or, to join a book club or having people come over for a party, those can be really anxiety provoking moments if we're not comfortable that they'll say yes. We're like, I don't know. What if they don't say yes? I can't possibly risk that. Sometimes just saying what we want for dinner is a lot. Telling someone else that what we want might be different than what they want. And as I started writing these out, the examples are endless. I mean, you just think about how many times in life we need to be able to ask for what we need or what we want. And yet it's so challenging. The stakes can actually get pretty high on this because if we don't ask and we don't get what we want, we run the risk of living someone else's life, right? We're just sort of going along to get along, or we're living a substandard version of our own. So I want to get underneath this today, and I want to look at the reasons why we don't ask, right? If you're somebody who's listening to this and saying, yeah, this is me. I really have a hard time asking for what I want. I want to get underneath what some of the reasons are that we don't ask so that you can confront whichever one might be in your way. And then I want to talk a little bit about a process for asking and a couple of things to remember when we start to build this muscle, right? Build this skill that might be rusty. So the first reason that I think we don't ask is probably the first one that comes to your mind immediately, which is we're afraid, right? We're afraid in some way. We are afraid probably of rejection, that the person is going to say no. And I think we tell ourselves that that's what we're afraid of, that the person is going to say no to my request. But even if they say yes, or even if we think there's a chance that they'll say yes, we can be feeling a fear of judgment. Like, well, what will they think of me because I asked? Even if they're going to say yes, we can be worried about how they're going to feel about the request. Or we could be experiencing a fear of conflict. Like, I might be able to get to a yes, but it might not be easy. Go back to the example about a flexible work arrangement. If that doesn't easily land with a yes if there is a discussion about it or a negotiation or somebody is frustrated by our request. Even if we get what we want on the other side of it, the perception of that conflict can be enough to stop us. And I think the fear of potential rejection, or you could call it failure, is a big one, because I think sometimes we literally choose the certainty of a no before we'll risk an uncertain yes, right? We will just double down. The only way that we have certainty is by not asking. And sometimes that is more powerful than tolerating the uncertainty that comes with asking. So that fear is something to really maybe become more precise about, try to really understand, what exactly am I afraid of? Am I afraid of rejection? What it would feel like to have them say no? Or is it more about conflict, or more about, their opinion or judgment of me? Or is it that I'm having a hard time tolerating the uncertainty? I think those can all get a little twisted together, and they can really keep us at the starting line where we just walk away from it altogether, right? We just don't ask at all. Fear is one bucket, but it's not the only one. The second one that I was thinking about is sometimes we don't ask because we think we're not supposed to. Like somehow asking for what we want is going to break an unwritten rule or a cultural norm. So, for example, we might think that it's impolite to ask, that our asking is somehow crossing an invisible boundary of politeness. And that when we ask, the person is going to feel like we're being rude, or we're being too forward, or we're being impolite. Also, sometimes we think we're not supposed to because we're like, this just isn't how it works. Like this is just supposed to come to us. I'm not supposed to ask for it. And sometimes there's a lot of cultural conditioning that is involved in that. I think a lot of women in particular, certainly women in my generation, were taught like good work speaks for itself. Results speak for themselves. So if you are going to go into your boss's office and ask for a promotion and basically lay out a case for why you think you deserve one and it's time for one, if you were told, listen, good results speak for themselves and you don't need to toot your own horn or brag about things like that, you can feel like asking is breaking some kind of rule. Right? You also can feel like I think a lot of times in the personal branding space where my business lives, and I have a lot of peers here, we kind of feel like we're supposed to be discovered, right? Like someone is supposed to just show up and, Oprah's going to one day cross paths with our work and say, oh, look at how amazing this is. And your platform is going to grow. And we think like it's not our job to go asking people to share our work, right? Or to give us feedback about our work and tell us how it can be better. And there's like a belief that that's just not how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to get discovered. I think actors and musicians can go through that same process of feeling like I'm not supposed to ask to be on that stage or to be in front of that bigger audience. Someone is going to come and find me, and that can really get in the way. So this notion of societal norms or even family norms and conditioning around what we are allowed and not allowed to do. Even think about something as simple as expressing an opinion on, what you might like to do on a weekend. If you as a child weren't really allowed to have an opinion about that, everything was sort of dictated for you, then that's a skill that may not have been built. And so feeling like, okay, well, I'm just supposed to do what everybody else wants to do. That's how it's supposed to work, can cause us to not actually get to explore the things that are intriguing or fulfilling or exciting to us. So that's the second piece. And remember, the first one was fear and all the associated fears. And the second one is sort of rules, like we think we're not supposed to do this. Hi, it's Cherylanne. Thanks for listening. Did you know that the ideas I share on this show are things I also can help you implement? If you want me in your corner helping you find more time for what fills you up, go to brilliant-balance.com/schedule and sign up for a free exploratory call. Give yourself this time. You'll be so glad you did. The third one is skills. Like we don't know how to ask. Okay. So even if we push past the fear, even if we don't think we're breaking rules, we can lack the skill in how to effectively ask. So if this hasn't been modeled for us, if every time we watch someone ask for something, they got embarrassed or awkward or, they just couldn't find the words, then we don't know how to do it in a way that holds enough power, enough authority to sound like we're somebody who deserves to get the yes, right? So the communication skills or the language that we have to conjure up to be able to make the ask, particularly if there is a power differential, right? Particularly if you're talking to your boss or you're talking to someone who has more perceived prestige or power than you do, when there's, I'm calling that a power differential. When that exists, it can be more difficult to find our words, right? Because we're so intimidated by the person that we have to ask that we just don't. I watch my kids go through this with teachers, right? Or in college, professors having to go and approach a teacher or a professor to ask for something, even if it's like, some things you can argue are objectively more difficult. Asking for an extension or like something that really is maybe asking them to bend a published rule can be tricky, but even just asking for clarification of a concept, hey, you went over this in class. I didn't quite get it. Can you go over it again? That is terrifying if you're dealing with the positional power differential. And I think we carry that into adulthood, where particularly in cases where there is authority, we get tripped up. Another place I think this gets in our way is if we start to project how they're going to receive the request. I was thinking earlier this weekend, one of my neighbors who has a teenage son, the teenage son came over because he was selling a fundraising, like a coupon book or something for the baseball team. And I was thinking about, he kind of just like bravely came up and made the ask. And I dutifully turned over my money and bought this coupon book that I will probably never use, right? Happy to support his team. But honestly, what was running through my head was, I want to reward the ask. I want this person to have the experience of, I walked up to somebody's door and did something difficult. And wow, that went better than I expected it to. It's the reason I always stop at lemonade stands. Same reason, right? Is I want those kids to be rewarded for putting themselves out there. And, even if I'm going to pay $1 for a Dixie cup of lemonade, it's like, I want them to have that experience of, I asked you if you wanted this and someone said yes. So that's how we build those skills. We learn how to ask in a way that is direct and simple and, brave and polite. And sometimes it's not going to get the yes, but the more times that we do it, the more the skill gets built around how to do it. One more reason that I think gets in our way, so we have fears and we have rules and we have skills. I think the other reason is we want a shortcut. Like it just feels like it's work. And we're honestly kind of annoyed that we have to ask, right? We want things to just fall into our lap readily and easily. We want people to ask us. We want people to come to us. We want them to know what we need. Right? We want it to be so obvious. And we just think like there has to be an easier way than this. And so that can result in apathy where we're so attached to the story that we shouldn't have to ask. Like we shouldn't have to do this, right? It's different than a rule where we're like, we're not allowed to do this. This one is we shouldn't have to do this. And so we're kind of annoyed by that. And we're like, you know what? If they want me to do this thing, or if they want to give me this raise, or if they want to know what I want for my birthday, they're going to ask. They're going to come to me. And the reality is that's just not how it works. So we must ask, right? We must find the way, find our voice, find our courage to be able to ask for what we want. And sometimes we have to ask more than once, because it turns out, all the way back to that story about my child who is so good at this, persistence pays off. Persistence pays off. In fact, if we look at the world of sales, okay, here is a statistic that is just mind-blowing because it applies not only if you work in sales, it applies to anything you're trying to get someone to do or agree to, okay? Here's the statistic. 80% of customers across industries say no 4 times before they say yes, okay? So it's the 5th or later request that finally gets the yes. 80% of customers say no 4 times before saying yes. And you ready for this one? Half of all salespeople never make even a single follow-up. So they never get to 2. So you need 5 for 80% of customers, but half of salespeople don't even get to 2. Okay. So the most successful salespeople are the ones who are really good at follow-up. We always think it's like, oh, they're so glib and they're so convincing and they have the best argument. Well, there's, I'm sure, truth to that. I'm sure there's merit in that idea. But really what it is the persistence and the system in place to continue to make the follow-up, right? Not, I think we don't do this because we think we're going to be annoying. We don't do this because we think we're going to ruin relationships. But in reality, persistence pays off, right? Sometimes the person on the other side needs to be familiarized with that idea more than once. It's not easy to give like a quick yes sometimes. Sometimes we need to warm up to the idea and sort of look at it or think about it from different angles before we finally say yes. Okay. So when we do make the ask, when we do kind of get our courage together and make the ask, this is a really important point to remember that we could get a variety of responses. I think we tell ourselves we're afraid of the no, but these requests are not always a simple yes or no. Sometimes it's the beginning of a conversation. And I want to get into this a little bit before I close the episode of a variety of responses that you might encounter when you ask. Of course, the dream is you could get an immediate yes, right? The relief, like my neighbor got with the fundraising coupons. Like that's relief. Wow, that one worked. Best case scenario. You could also get an immediate no, right? A different person could just slam the door in your face or say, just immediately tell you, absolutely not. And we've all given those responses to our kids, right? They come in and ask for something and we're like, that's a hard no. It's immediately a no. But I don't think those two answers are the most common. I think there's a big overlap here with how people make decisions and actually our challenges with decision making as a culture, which is a whole separate episode. But there's a few other things that could happen. One thing that could happen is we could get some questions back. And I didn't say this earlier, but I think that could be another reason that we get nervous about asking is we're not sure how we're going to handle that part of the process, right? When someone asks us questions or they want us to kind of further our case or clarify our request, that can be uncomfortable, especially if we don't feel like we're great on our feet with words. So you could get questions. You could get offered something different than what you asked for, maybe even something better. You know, like sometimes we ask for something and we don't get the yes, but the person offers us an alternative. And sometimes the alternative can even be better. You could get introduced to someone else. So think about a place where you're asking for an introduction or you're asking for assistance or advice with something, or even like think about asking for a donation. Back to my example of the charity gala where we were asking for silent auction and live auction donations. In both of those cases, I think I had this experience of getting something different than we requested, right? Or getting introduced to someone else who could help. So let's say we went to like the Cincinnati Reds organization and asked for baseball tickets. They may have given us something different than the tickets to the game that we were asking for. They also made introductions to other teams, right? And so that happens when you are able to get into the conversation. And honestly, something that happens a lot, particularly if you work in traditional sales, is you could get ignored or get no response unless you're in a face-to-face dialogue. So if you're asking through email or through text or through a direct mailer that's going to someone's mailbox, you know, for whatever the thing is that's going on, you might get no response because that person either didn't read your communication, which you're going to interpret as a no, but might not mean no at all, right? Second thing is they were really busy that day and they read it and they're like, oh, I'll respond to this later. And then they didn't, and you didn't follow up. Or they were thinking about it, right? They had questions and there wasn't a great mechanism to kind of engage them back and forth. So we have to be careful that we don't glom all of those things together and think of them as no's, right? Getting no response or getting ignored is actually not a no. Getting introduced to someone else or getting something different is just a different kind of a win. answering questions is part of the process, right? And they're all kind of on that journey to yes. But there's one thing absolutely for certain, and that is that we cannot get the yes without the ask. So the next time that there is something that you really want, or even that you need, I want you to think about these examples, really figure out which one of these blocks is at play for you, and then find a moment of courage to ask, because you just might be shocked by the doors that open when you do. That is all for today, my friends. Until next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.